Hey guys, how's it going? In this video, we're going to be creating this budget application from scratch using the Angular framework. So here we have this section where we can add a new item. This is a form which allows the user to add a new budget item, and then those items will be displayed in these columns here. So let's try and add an item. Let's set the amount here to 1,000. And let's set the description to salary, okay, and let's click add, and there we go. So here we can see that a few things have happened. First of all, we get this budget item being displayed here, and we also saw that we now have 1,000 being displayed in this section up here. This is the total budget value. So let's actually add a new item. Let's now add an expense. So this will be an item with a negative amount. So let's say minus 800, and let's set the description to rent. Okay, let's press enter. And now we have this new budget item added to the expenses column. And now we can also see that we have 200 being displayed up here. This is the result of 1,000 minus the 800 here. Let's now add another item. Let's add minus 10 for a Netflix subscription. Okay, let's press enter, and there we go. So now we have 190. Great. Okay, let's go and click on one of these items. When we click on the budget items, we get this dialog appear, and this dialog allows us to edit the values of this budget item. So we can, for example, change this to minus 12 and click save. Great, so now we can see that this value has been updated to minus 12, and also this value up here has been changed to 188. Great, okay, so let's change this again. Let's go to the rent item and let's click on it, and let's change this to minus 1,200, and let's click save. Great, and now we have a negative value being displayed up here, and now we can see that this text is red because we have a negative value. Great. Cool, so this value is now red because it's a negative value. Awesome. Let's go and see how to delete items. When we hover over these cards, we can see that we get this delete button showing up. And it kind of zooms in when we hover over the card. And when we click on the delete button, then that item is deleted. And we can see that this value up here has updated, and we can see that if we delete the rent, we now have 1,000. Cool. Great, okay. One last thing that I want to show you is, let's add a new item. Let's add 500, and let's call this test, and let's click add. And let's go and change the description. So let's change this to this has been updated. Okay, press save, and there we go. We can see that the description has been updated in the card of this budget item. Great. Let's change this again. Testing 1, 2, 3. And there we go. We can see that this has been updated to testing 1, 2, 3. Awesome. Great, okay, so this is the application that we are going to be building in this video. So let's get started. Alright then, okay. So I have this folder here, and this is the folder where I want to create the Angular application. So let's open up a terminal, and we can actually just close this, and we can now create the Angular application. Let me just make this a bit bigger so you guys can see. Right, so here we're going to be using the Angular CLI to generate this application, or create this application. So type in the terminal ng-new, and then the name of the application, which we'll be calling the budget app. And here we have to add a few flags. So here we can put the style flag and set that to CSS, so that we'll be using the Sass compiler for compiling the style files, which will be the SCSS variant of Sass. And we need to do this because we're going to be using the Bulma CSS framework, which uses Sass. So we need that to compile the source files for Bulma, and we also need it so that we can change the variables that Bulma provides for us. Okay, so the next flag we'll be using is the routing flag, and we have to set that to true, and that just basically means that the Angular CLI will set up the basic routing module for us where we can put the routing configuration. Alright then, so let's press enter and it will now create the new app. So let's just wait for this to complete. Alright then, okay, so that's now being created. So let's change directory into that folder, and now let's use the code command to open up Visual Studio Code, which is the text editor that I'll be using. Okay, and yeah, okay, so the first thing that I want to do is go to the terminal and I want to install the Bulma CSS framework. Let me install that now. Bulma, and then save that as well so that it's saved to the dependencies of this project. Press enter and that will install. This is the CSS framework that we'll be using. It's a very good CSS framework that's really easy to use. So that's what we'll be using. So once it's been installed, we can go to the styles.scss file, which is the global styles file. And here we can import the Bulma source files. So let's import that now from node modules /Bulma/Bulma.sas. That will import all of the Bulma source files. You could also selectively import the ones that you'll be using, but for this tutorial we will be just importing all of them. So save that now, and now we have to go to the source folder here, right click and click on new file, and here we'll be creating a new file called main styles.scss. This is the file in which we'll be defining the global styles and changing variables. And we're doing this so that we can keep this styles.scss clean and just import in here, and then in here we can actually put the global CSS styles that we need, and also to change the Bulma variables. So talking of Bulma variables, we can go to the documentation, go to the customize page and go onto with SAS CLI. That's just the one that we have to go on. And then in here, it provides us with some code that we can copy and paste. In the section 6 here, we can copy this content here where we have some example variables that they've changed. And we can actually just paste it in here and save this now. And we can now change these a bit to set the brand colors of this application. And for that, we won't need these ones. We'll just need the purple for now. And let's change this value, and let's just change this to this color here. Save that. So just to let you know, the source files will be on GitHub. The link will be within the description of this video. So we are using the RGB value 159, 104, 235. That is the shade of purple that we'll be using. And we also want to define some other variables here. So let's define light gray. And for this, we'll set this to hashtag F5, 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 which is just a really, really light gray. And we'll then be defining the dark variable. And we'll set this to a very dark blue. And we'll be using an RGB color code here. And we'll be putting in 22, 28, 41. Okay. And we'll also be defining green. And this will be a hex color code 00CC86, as well as light green. And this will be a very light green with a hex color code of BAFACD. Okay, save that now. Alright, okay, let's quickly get through the next ones. We'll be creating a red, and that will be DC3900. And we'll be creating a light red as well, which is a hex color code with two Fs, E5, E3. Okay, cool. And we want to keep this line of code here. That's good. We don't need these. The primary will be purple, so we can keep that. We will also set the link to purple as well. Okay, save that. And we don't need these two variables here, so let's delete those. And we can set this background color to white. And we can set the background color here, not to transparent, but to light gray, which is the variable we just created. So save that. And okay, I think we're pretty much finished. One thing we do want to do though is we want to change this, and we want to actually import Lato as well from Google Fonts. Okay, and the way that we can do that is we can go here and put in a pipe, and we can go and type in the new font that we want to import, which will be Lato. And we want two font weights, which will be 300 and 900. Okay, so save that now. So now what we want to do is we want to go to the app.component.html, and here we have this code here with the placeholder content. And first thing we can actually do is just serve this application. So go to the terminal and type in ng-serve, and let's just wait until that builds the application and serves it. Alright then, so once that's finished, we can go to Chrome or just your browser and go to localhost 4200, and here we have the application. Okay, and one thing that I notice here is that we do have the Bulma styling, but we don't have the font, and we also don't have the custom purple color that we set here. So that's because I forgot to import it. Yeah, okay, so let's import the main-styles.css to the main styles.css file. So we can import that here and type in main styles. That's all we have to do there. Save that and go to the app, and there we go. We now have the purple used for the links here, and we're also using the Nunito font, which is great. Okay, so let's go back here and let's get rid of this placeholder content and save that. And now what we can do is go to the routing module. We will have the routing module up here. So let's click on this routing module here, and let's start defining some routes. Okay, the first thing we want to do though is create the main page component. So let's create a new terminal, and let's create a new component for that page. So to do that, I'm going to use the Angular CLI, and I'm going to generate a component, and I'm going to call that component the main page component. Just type in main page and click enter. Okay, so that's now been created here. So now let's go to the main page.component.html, and we have the main page works here. That's just the default text that's set by the Angular CLI. Now let's actually go to the routing module, and let's create a route for that. Okay, so here we will just have one route, and that route will be path, and that will be the empty path, and we'll then say components, and then we'll say main page component. This application is pretty basic, so then it's only going to have one page, which is that page, but you could expand this application to contain multiple pages, and then to do that you could create multiple path objects here, route objects, and just and then just set the path to, you know, /login or /signup, and then you just change the component here. But we don't have to do that for this tutorial, so we will just be keeping it simple with one route. Okay, so save that now, and let's go back to our app, and it says main page works. That's great. Okay, so now let's go back to the main page, and we can close this routing module. Okay, so the first thing we want to do is we want to create this top bar here. So let's create that now. The markup for this is pretty simple. We just create a div which has class of top bar. That's the name of the class. And then inside here we can put in a h1 tag, put in the name of the app. Okay, save that now, and we can go back to our app, and we can see that we get that h1 tag here. but we have to actually style this. So let's go to the style file and let's start creating the styles for this. So let's set the width to 100%. And let's set the height to 68 pixels. And let's set the display to flex. Okay. And now we want to set the background. Here we'll be using a linear gradient. And here we just want to set this to a 75-degree angle. And here we want to put the starting color. And this is where we will put the starting color. Okay, so here we can set the starting color as an RGB value, 214, 180, 247, which is a light purple, as you can see here, light purple. And the last color here will be 173, 203, 231, which is a light blue, like that. Okay, so save that now, and we can go back to our app, and we now have this nice gradient. There we go. That's the nice gradient there, and that's 68 pixels high, and that's full width. Okay, and now what we want to do is we want to center this text. Okay, so let's do that now. Horizontally and vertically. Center the text, and here we can use justify content, center, and align items, center. Save that now. Now this text is perfectly centered. Great. And now we can create the styles for the H1 tag. So let's do that now. So here we can set the font size to 18 pixels, set the font family to Lato, and we can set the letter spacing to 1 pixel. Okay, so let's look how that looks now. Okay, we have to actually set the font weight though, so that's the light variant of the Lato font. We want the heavy variant. So let's set the font weight to 900, save that. That is now bold now. So one thing we want to do though is we want to set a text transform to uppercase. Save that now, and that's now all uppercase. Great. And that's pretty much it, but we do want to set the color though. So let's set the color here, and here we want to use a variable that we created in the main styles.scss. We want to use the dark variable, so let's set that here. But you'll notice that we get this error, and that's because we need to have access to this variable as it's not defined. We have to actually import the main-styles.scss file. So let's do that now. So let's go and find that. Okay, there we go. We had to go back 2 directories and then go to the main-styles.scss. Okay, save that now, and let's go back to our app, and we now have no errors, and this now has a dark blue color. Okay, great. So now let's go back to the template, and let's start creating this bar here, where the total budget value will be displayed. So let's create that bar now. Alright, so let's create the section now. So let's create a div, and let's set the class to total budget section. Okay, we could even create a section tag, and that might be better. Okay, cool. And in here we want to have a H2 tag, and in here this will contain the total budget value, but for now we'll just set a dummy value, so let's just say 1,500. Save that now, and let's go to the style file, and let's create the styles for that section. So total budget section. Okay, and in here we want to set the display to flex, so that we'll be using flexbox. Set the height to 250 pixels and set the background to dark. Okay, save that now and let's go back to the app. And we now have this bar here. You might not be able to see it, but we do have the 1500 text here. But that has to be styled. So let's create the styles for that now. Let's create the H2 styles. So here we want to set the font family to Lato. And we want to set the font weight to 300, so that we'll be using the light variant of the Lato font. Okay, so save this now and go back to the app, and we now have that lighter font there. We need to set the font size though, and we'll be using the size of 58. Save that now, go back to the app, and now we have a much larger text here. And let's set the color for now to be white, but we will want this to be green when it's positive and red when it's negative, but that's some logic that we'll program in later. Okay, so let's go back to the code here and let's try and center this. So that looks good, but it's not centered, so this text has to be perfectly centered like this was. And for that, we can just copy and paste this code here, copy that, and paste it in the total budget section here. Save this now, go back to the app, and now it's perfectly centered. Great, okay. One thing we could also do now is set some classes for when we want it to be green and when we want it to be red. So let's do that. Let's define some styles for the green class. When we have the total budget section with a nested H2 element here, which also has the green class, then the color will be set to green. And let's do the same thing for red. Let's just copy and paste this. And let's call this red. And let's change this to red. And remember that these are the variables that we created in here. Those are the variables that we created there. So let's go back to the app and see how it looks. Okay, so we don't have anything here, and that's obviously because we didn't set the class on this H2. So let's set the class here to green. Save this now and go back to the app. And now we have this green. This doesn't look like the UI mockup. Here, this looks more vibrant and lighter, and this looks a bit dull. So to fix this, we can actually use a SAS function called lighten. And we can use this by just calling the lighten function. And that takes in a color value and an amount. So let's copy this green variable and let's replace it with this. And the amount we can set as a percentage. So we can set 5%, for example. Save this, go back to the app, and that looks a lot better already. But that isn't as light as we want it. So let's set this to 12%. And there we go. That looks a lot better and is actually the exact same color value that we are using within this mockup. Great. Okay, so let's do the same thing for red. Let's go here and let's change this to red. Save this now. But we have the same problem as before. This is too dark. So let's go here and let's copy and paste this lighten function. And let's put red here. Save that now. Go back to the app. And there we go. That looks a lot better. Okay, so we've now created the styles for this total budget section. That's all done. So we still have to do the styling for this section here, where the user is able to create an income or expense. And we also have this section here, where we have these two lists, which show the income and expenses of the user. Okay, so let's create that now. Let's go to the HTML and let's start creating some markup for this. Okay, so let's create another section with a class of add item section. Okay, and within here we'll create a div with the class of add item container. Okay, and that's it. Let's go to the styling and let's just create the styles for the section and container. And then nested within here we'll create, this actually has to be section, and then nested within here we have to put the add item container. There we go. Okay, so save that now. Let's start defining some styles. We'll set the display to flex. And we'll then go up here and copy and paste this code here that we used to center. And we'll paste it here because we want that section to be centered. This form here to be perfectly centered. So that's why we need that code. And then in here we want to set the width to 680 pixels. So save that now and go back to the app. And currently we can't see anything, but we can see something if we set the background color here to red, for example, and set the height as well to, for example, 50 pixels. Then we have this section, which is in red. Great, okay, so now we have this container where we can now insert the markup for this form. Great, okay, so let's do that now. Let's get rid of these two lines of code. Save that now. And now let's go back to the HTML. And we could actually define the form here, but what I actually want to do is create a new component for this. So let's go to the terminal and let's generate a new component. And I want to create a component with the name of add item form. Okay, press enter and there we go. Okay, so that's now been created here. And what we can now do is go to HTML and we have this placeholder like content here. And if we go to the TypeScript file, we can see that the selector for this component is app-add-item-form. So let's copy and paste this now. Let's copy this selector. Let's go back to the main page and we can now paste this form, press enter, and we can now put it within tags. This will now inject that component here. Great, okay, so let's save this now and let's go back to the app and we can now see that we have the add item form works show up here, which means it's working. Okay, so now we can go and create that form. So for this, let's go to the Bulma documentation because we'll be using Bulma classes to create the form. So let's click on documentation, go to form, and let's go to general, and we can see many examples of forms. We will want to find one that's horizontal. So let's just Control F. Let's try and find horizontal. There we go. We have this section here called horizontal form, and we have to use the isHorizontal modifier, which is another class that we have to add to the form to achieve this horizontal form. So let's do that now. Okay, so let's go back to the template for the add item form. Let's get rid of this placeholder content and let's create a form tag. Let's remove the action. We won't be needing that action. And let's just, in here, we can create a div with a class of field. And in here, we'll create a div with a class of field body. And inside here, we want to create a field. And also, we have to set the isHorizontal here, by the way. isHorizontal. Let's set that. So that is horizontal. And so here we have the class of field, and this will be the field for the number amount. This field here. That's what we're creating now. This field here that we are defining is the container, basically. And then we have the field body, which is the container of these child field items, which will be this input here, and this button here. And we are now creating the first field, which is the amount box here. So let's create that now. And let's create the control. which will be using a p tag here, which is what the Bulma documentation uses. Within the documentation here, we can see that we have to create the field with the isHorizontal modifier, and then create the field body, then create the field, and then use a p tag with the class of control. That's what we have to do. So that's what we're doing. And inside here, we have to create the input. And this will be a type number. And we have to set the class of input. Save that now. And we also want to set the placeholder to amount. Okay, save this now and go back to our app. And we can now see that we have just this one amount with these up and down arrows here because we set it as a type number. That's why we get these buttons here. Okay, so one thing we want to do straight away is limit the size of this input. We want to set the width of this. So let's use a style attribute, and let's set the width to 100 pixels. Save that now, go back here, and now we only have 100 pixels of width, like in the UI mockup here. One issue we do have is that the background is set to white. I'm not sure why that is, because we did set that to gray. So this should be working. Oh, okay, right. So this is using the wrong variable name. Okay, so let's set background color here, not border color. Save that now and go back to the app. And we now have the same color as we have here. One issue is we do have this border, which we can remove by setting the border color to transparent. Let's see if this works. There we go. Okay, cool. Okay, so that's now working. Let's go to the form component again, and let's finish this. So we now want to create this description box here. So let's just copy and paste this field here. Paste it here, and let's change the type here and set this to text. Let's get rid of this style. Save that, and let's change the placeholder to description. Alright then, okay, so let's go and see how it looks. Okay, and we have the description here. Okay, and we have this issue where there is this white space here. And that's because we have to set a class on this field that is narrow. Save that. Okay, good. So now that looks good. Now we want to create the add button. So that's pretty easy. Let's just create the add button. Let's create a field div. And inside there, create the button with the class of button. And let's set it to primary. So let's put the class isPrimary. Okay, so create that there. And then we want to set this to add. Okay, so save this now and go back to the app. And we now have that button there. Great. So now this looks very similar to the app we have here. You may have noticed that this has a much lighter purple, and that's actually because that is set to disabled. So, for example, let me go here and set this to disabled. Okay, so that is what we have in this mockup. And that's actually because this button should be disabled when these fields aren't valid. And they aren't valid right now since they don't have content. So we will remove that for now, but later on we will set this to be conditionally disabled depending on whether the form is valid or not. Okay, so let's save this for now, and let's go back here. And we actually have to put some padding here. So let's go back to the main page.component.html. And let's set some padding. So let's go here and let's set the style and set padding 20 pixels. Save that. And that's a similar amount of padding that we have in the mockup. But one thing that I notice is this seems quite small. So let's see what's going on here. Okay, so we do have an issue here since this is not taking up the full width of the container because it should be 680 pixels, but it's not going all the way there. So we have to find out what's going wrong there. So let's go back to the code and let's go back to the add item form component and let's see what's going wrong. I think the issue is because you have to put the isNarrow class here. Let's try that. Okay, there we go. That looks a lot better. And that is taking up all 680 pixels of the width. Great. Okay, so that's now done. Now we can move on to this section here where we have these two columns. So let's do that now. Let's go back to the main page.component.html and let's start coding that. Okay, so what we actually want to do is we want to create a new component. So let's get a terminal up here and let's create a new component. ng generate components. This one's going to be called budget item list. Okay, press enter. And the new component should come up here. There we go. So let's go into the HTML here. First thing, let's actually go back to the main page and let's call that component. So app and then budget dash list item list. So item dash list. Okay, save this now and go back to the app. And we have the budget item list works here. But what I actually want to do is, first of all, just create this line that we have here, this separator. So let's quickly create that. That's very simple. That's just using a HR tag. So save that now and go back to the app. So we do get this line, but we have all of this extra padding here. And that's because if we go into the inspect elements and go onto this HR, you'll see that we have a lot of margin. Where is it? Yeah. So here we have 24 pixels of margin. So we have to actually fix that. So we can actually put a style tag, a style attribute here, and set the margin top to 0. Save that and go back to the app. And now it is normal and we don't have the top margin here. Great. And it looks very similar to what we have in the mockup. So great. Let's go back to the code and now let's go and work on the budget item list. Let's delete this placeholder content and let's start creating the markup for this. So first we want to create the section and that's going to have a class of budget items section, and inside there we're going to have a container, so a div with the class of budget items container, and inside there we're going to have an income column, and inside there we'll have a h1 tag with income, and we'll copy and paste this now and we'll set this to expenses column. Save that, change this to expenses, save that, and let's go and look at our app. We have that come up here. Okay, so now let's go into the .scss file here to write some styles. Alright then, okay, so the first thing I want to do is import main styles, main-styles.scss, and that's because we'll be using variables that we've defined in main styles. Okay, so we want to first create the styles for the budget item section. And this will be a flex box with a padding of 50 pixels. Okay, and then we want to create the styles for the container. So we'll nest it here. Okay, and we'll set this to flexbox as well. And we'll set the max width to 680 pixels so that it will line up with the form here. So both of these sections have a max width of 680 pixels so that they line up here. Okay, great. Let's now set the height and width to 100%. Okay. And now let's write the styles for the income and expenses column. So we'll nest these as well. We want to create styles for both the income column and the expenses column, since they'll be very similar. So we'll just do that, so that these styles that we write here will be applied to both of these classes now. Okay, so we'll set the display to flex as usual. Set the flex direction to column, and we'll set the flex basis to 0. That is just so that the columns will be the same size regardless of the content. And we'll set flex grow to 1. And this is so that these columns will take up all available space. Now let's write the code for the heading. So font family will be Lato. And the font size will be 24 pixels. And the font weight will be heavy. We'll use 900. Okay, we also want to transform the text to uppercase. Great. Okay, so let's go and see how it looks now. Okay, this looks a bit better than it did before. We now do have these two columns, and they do look well spaced out, but they aren't centered. So let's center these columns. Here we have to horizontally and vertically center flex children, which will just be the container. But okay, so here we have to set justify content to center and align items to center. That's how you center things perfectly in Flexbox. You set the parent to flex and you set these properties here. Okay, so let's go and see how it looks now. Now they're centered. That looks great. And if you look at the mockup, we can see that it is exactly how it should be in terms of the position. So that looks good. Now let's continue writing styles. Now we want to write some styles for the individual columns. Let's first write the styles for the income column. And in here we'll set the margin right to 35 pixels. And we'll set the heading, the color to green. And remember that we had to first import from main styles because that's where we defined the green variable. Okay, let's go to our app and let's see. Great. Okay, so now we have this in green. Great. Okay, so now let's copy and paste this and do the same thing for the expenses column. So let's change this to expenses column, and we'll remove margin right because we don't need it, but we will set the color to red. Okay, save that. Okay, and go to the app, and we now have these headings in green and red, and they do look exactly the same as the mockup. Great. Okay, so now what we want to do is we want to create these budget items. So let's start doing that. Let's go back to the markup, the budget item list.component.html. So the first thing we want to do is create a component for those items. So let's go back to the terminal and let's type in ng generate components, and then we'll nest this within this folder. So we'll type in the folder, which is budget item list slash, and then the component name budget item card. Okay, press enter. And that's now created that component there. Great, let's go to the markup here, and we can see that we have the default text here. And let's go back to the markup for the list, and let's just insert some cards here. So let's call it app budget card. Let's create a few of them, and let's do the same thing in the expenses column. Okay, save that and go to the app. We're getting some sort of error. Let's look at the error. Is not a known element. Oh yeah, because we are missing the item. Okay, let's get rid of these, and let's just put item here. Alright, that should now work. Let's save this now. And we can now see that we get the item here. Great. Now let's copy and paste these. So copy and paste them there, and then copy and paste these two and paste them here. Save this and go back, and we now have 4 budget item cards. Great. Okay, so now let's go back to the budget item card.component.html, and let's delete this, and let's start writing the markup for the card. Alright then, okay, so the first div we want to create will have the class of root, and inside there we'll have a div with a class of budget item, and inside there we'll have a div with class of description, and then that will display the description of the budget item, so the main text. So that will be a paragraph tag, and then we'll just call this test for now. And then we'll create a div with the class of amount, and we'll put a paragraph tag in there also, and for now we'll just say 100. Okay, so save this now. Let's go back to the app, and we can now see that we get that showing up there, but we obviously have to do the styles for this. So let's go to the .scss file for the budget item card. Okay, and the first thing we want to do is first import the main styles as usual, and we then want to start writing the styles for the root div. Okay, we will set the display to flex as usual, and we'll set the width to 100%. Okay, that's it for now. We will go back to that later. Next, we want to create the styles for the budget item class. Okay, so in here we'll set the display to flex, and we'll set the width to 100%, and we'll set the background color to light gray, which is a variable that we defined in the main styles. Okay, and then we have to set the padding to 10 pixels, and we want to set the border radius to 5 pixels. Okay, let's save this for now, and let's go back to the app, and we now have these cards, and they're looking pretty good actually. These look quite similar to what we have here, so that's a good start. Now what we can do is set the cursor to pointer, because these will be clickable. So save that, and we now have the pointer cursor. Great. Okay, so now we can create the styles for the class of description. Set flex grow to 1 so that it will grow to take up the remaining space, and we'll set the font size to 18 pixels, and we'll set the margin left to 5 pixels. Okay, save this now. Great. Okay, so now we have the title, which is taking up the full width and is shifting this amount text here all the way to the right. That's great. So now this is looking pretty similar to the mockup. Great. Now let's create the styles for the amount class. Okay, let's set the padding to 5 pixels, and let's set the border radius to 3 pixels. Okay, and now we want to change the color of these depending on whether they are an income or an expense. So we will be creating the income and expense classes here, and we'll be setting the paragraph tags to color red, and we'll be setting the amount class to background color light red. Okay, and let's do the same thing for income. So let's copy and paste this. Let's rename this to income, and let's change this to green, and let's change this to green as well. Okay, save this now, and let's go back to the app, and we don't see any difference, and that's because we have to actually set these classes in the markup. So let's go back to the HTML, and let's go on the budget item, and let's set this to expense. Save this and go back to the app, and now all of these are set to expense, and they are all red. Great. Let's try and set this to income. Save that, and now they're all green. That's very good. Okay, basically what we want to be able to do is dynamically change the class depending on whether this is an income or an expense. And that's what we're going to do now. So let's remove this for now. and let's go to the TypeScript file, because we will need to take in a parameter using the @input decorator. So let's do that. Use the @input, and you have to import it from Angular core. And here we can create a property that can be input into the component using property binding. So let's call this isIncome, which will be a type of Boolean. Okay, save this now. And now we can go back to the template and we can use the ng class directive. So within square brackets, type in ng class and set that equal to a string. And inside that string, we can put in curly brackets. And in here, we have to put in an ng class expression. And basically what that is you have to first, in single quotes, type the name of the class. And we'll say this is income. And we then put a colon, and then we put the TypeScript expression that has to result in a Boolean value. So this is the condition. So here we will just say isIncome. What this is saying is the income class will be added to this div element when the isIncome Boolean is true. Okay, so let's save this now and go back to the app. And we don't have anything. And that's good because we aren't setting the isIncome Boolean. We can take it in from the main page component. We can pass in the isIncome Boolean value through property binding. Not in main page, sorry, but in the budget item list. So we can take it in through property binding. So we can, for example, go here and in square brackets, we can type in isIncome. And we can set this to true. Save this. And if we go back here, we can see that this first one has the isIncome set to true, and therefore it has green styling. And if we inspect this, we can see that it has the income class, whereas these ones don't have the income class applied. And that's because we only set the isIncome value to one of those cards, not the other three. So what we can do is we can go to the TypeScript file and we can actually set a default value. Let's try that. Let's set this to false by default. So save this now and go back to the app. And that's not doing anything. And that's because we haven't set the condition for the expense class. So let's do that now. So let's put a comma here and let's type in expenses in quotes and put a colon here. And now let's put the condition for when the expenses class should be applied. That's when isIncome is set to false. So we could put here isIncome is equal to false. Let's save this now and go back to the app. Okay, that's not doing anything. I think we have to set this to expense. Save this. Great, okay, so now we have 1 green and 3 red. That's because these three have the default value of isIncome is equal to false. And that's why the expense class is being applied. Okay, however, we do want to set this to true because by default it makes sense that the isIncome value is set to true. So let's set this to true, save that, and now they're all green. Okay, but one thing I want to change here is this statement here. There's a much better way of saying this, and that's not isIncome. So let's save this now and go back to the app. And they're still all green. Let's change this back to false. And we should get 1 green and 3 red. Great, okay, so we get 1 green and 3 red. Good. Let's change this back to true. Save that. And now let's go to the budget item list. And let's set this one to true. And these ones to false, because these ones are in the expenses column. So save this and go back to the app. And we now have the income and the expenses, the green and the red. Great. Okay, that was very good. So now we can go back to the styles because there's still a lot to do. We have to set some spacing here, don't we? So let's do that. Actually, what we can actually do is not set it in this component, but set it in the list component. So we can do this here. Let's just set styles on these component tags. So let's set style, and let's set margin bottom to 20 pixels. Okay, save this now and go back to the app, and now we have nice amount of spacing here, but there isn't much space in between these two. So let's create a div with a class that encapsulates all of these items so that we can control those styles a bit better. Let's go here and let's create a div with a class of budget items, and let's move these two into there. Okay, and let's do the same thing here. Okay, so now let's go to the list styles. Okay, and let's go up here into the income and expenses column section here. Let's go just after this H1. Let's create styles for the budget items. And we'll set display to flex. And we'll set the flex direction to be column. And we'll set the margin top to 20 pixels. Okay, save this now and let's go back to the app. Great, okay, so there's more spacing here. But actually, just looking at it, I do see one or two issues. This text here is too high up and it's not centered. So this should be centered. Let's try and fix this. So we can see that it's top aligned. So the top of this p tag and the top of this thing here, they are aligned. So that isn't good. So it should be centered. So the way that we can do this is, well, this div is centered, but the paragraph tag isn't. Okay, so this p tag has to be centered. So we will have to put in some styling into the description class to center its children elements. So let's go back to the code here. And let's go to the description class here. And what we have to do here is set this to display flex. And we then have to, let's go down here. And let's put in a comment here that says to vertically center the children element. Okay, so here we'll do align items center, save this, and then go back to our app. And now it's centered. It's centered vertically. And we can see that because the p tag is now not top aligned, but it's actually centered. Great. Okay. So we fixed that. So I think the last thing we have to do on the UI is we have to add the delete button to these cards. So let's do that. Let's go back to the code. Okay. And let's go here. And let's go to the markup actually. So let's go to the budget item card.html, .component.html, and in here we have to create a div for the delete button. So let's make it not in the budget item, but in the root. So let's put some space here, and in here we'll create a div with the class of X icon button. And that's because we will have a X inside the button, which will represent delete. Okay, so let's save this now, and let's go to the styling again, the .scss file. Let's go to the root here, and let's set the position to relative. And we have to do this because we're going to set the X icon button to position absolute. So we need this line of code here. So now let's do dot X icon button, and let's set the position to absolute, and let's set the height to 30 pixels and the width to 30 pixels, and let's set the background to red. Save this now, and let's go back to our app, and as you can see, we now have this red box here in each of the cards. And it's set to position absolute, which means it's overlaying the current content. Great, okay, so now let's go back to the styling and let's set right to 0. Save that and go back here. And now they are right aligned. Basically what we want to do is we want to make these boxes go slightly outside. So half of the box will be inside and half of the box will be outside. So let's do that now. First thing I want to do though is change the height and width to 34 pixels and 34 pixels. And I want to set the border radius to 50% to make it a circle. So save this now and go back to the app. And now there's circles. Great. And now what I want to do is I want to set the top to minus 17 pixels. Okay, great, and that worked. And we are doing this because this has to be half of the height. And we have to do the same thing with the right here. So minus 17 pixels. And this has to be half of the width. So save this now and go back to the app. And there we go. We have the correct position, which is right on the edge. Great. Okay, so now we want to change the colors and stuff. So let's go back here and let's change the background color. And for this, we want to use dark. So change that to dark, and there we go. We're now using dark, which is the same color that we've used for this background here and for the text up here. Okay, so now we want to put an X icon inside there. So let's go back to our code. And the icon that I'll be using is an SVG file, which you can find in the GitHub repository. So go to github.com/devstacker/budget-app-angular. That's budget-app-angular. And you can then go to the source folder and then go to the assets folder. And inside here, we have the delete_icon.svg. And this is the file that you have to download to use this icon for the delete button. So to download this icon, you can go and click on deleteicon.svg. And then here we can see the icon. And to download it, you can go to raw and right click and then go to save link as. And then you can save the SVG document. Okay, so click save. And there you go. So now you have downloaded the deleteicon.svg. So now we can use this file in our Angular project. Okay, so here I have a delete icon that I created, which is simply just a red X. That's a very simple SVG. And we want to put this in the assets of this project. So let's scroll down in this file explorer here. And here we have this folder called assets. So let's open this up here and let's go back to the folder where I had this icon, and I'm going to drag and drop it here. Great. So now the delete icon is now part of the assets of this project. Close this now, and we can now use it in the styling to set the background image. So that's what I'm going to do. URL. And I'm going to go back a few directories and find assets there, and deleteicon.svg. By the way, this file, this deleteicon.svg will be in the GitHub repository, so you can grab that file from the GitHub repo. Okay, so let's save this now and let's go back to the app, and there we go. We now have this red X here. Great, okay, so that is working. But we do have the problem of it is repeating itself multiple times and it's not centered. So let's go back to the code and let's change that. So let's set the background repeat and let's set this to no repeat. Save this and go back to the app. And now we don't have it repeating, we just have one instance of the X. Okay, so now we can set the background position and set this to center. And now it's centered. That's great. Okay, great. Okay, so now that's working. So now what we want to do is we want to make this only show when we hover over the card. So let's do that now. Let's go over here. Okay, and here we can use the and sign and then do hover. What this will do is this styling will be applied when there is the hover event on the root div. So here we want to say that the .x icon button has an opacity of 1, so it's fully visible. And we want to say also that transform scale 1, so that it is the correct size. And the reason I'm doing this is because here, let's go to the X icon button normal styles, and let's set transform scale to 0, so that when we hover over the card, it then zooms in, so that we get a nice effect. So let's save this now, and let's go to the app, and we don't have the X icon showing, so let's hover over the card. It's only showing when we hover over the card. Great. Okay, so what we actually want to do now is set a transition. So let's go here and let's set a transition. So transition, and we'll say that it will transition the opacity property 0.2 seconds, ease in. That is the timing function that we'll be using. And we'll also say that it will transition the transform property using the same values, 0.2 seconds and ease in. Great. Save this now and let's go back to the app and let's try and hover over this card. And as you can see, it is zooming in. Great. Okay, so that's working. But we do have one issue, and that is that this button is fully visible from the start. And that's because we're not setting the opacity property here. So here we have to set the opacity to 0. Save this now and go back to the app. And let's try this again. Great. Okay, so now it fades in and zooms in. Great. But we could set this to ease out, actually. Let's set this to ease out. That looks much better. There we go. Okay, cool. So now that's working. Now we want to set the styles for when we hover over this button. So let's go back to the styling and let's set the hover styles. This and then the hover means that when the parent, which is this, is hovered, when the X icon button is hovered, these styles will be applied. So we want to set transform to scale and then 1.2 so that it zooms in. So let's save this now and go back to the app and let's try this. So let's hover over it and let's hover over the button and it isn't doing anything. That's interesting. So we've got some sort of bug. Let's see why that is. Transform scale 1.2. Oh, okay, so here we have an issue with the order of the styles. So since this code is first, this code here is overriding it. So even when we are hovering over the X icon button and these styles are trying to be applied, these styles are overriding them. So let's cut this code here and let's go to above here and let's paste them in here. Okay, so let's save this now and go back to the app. And let's try this now. Let's try and hover over the button. Great, and now it's zooming in. Cool. Okay, so that's all we wanted to do. So now the last thing I want to do is put a cursor pointer when we hover over this. So let's go back to the styles. And we can just set the cursor to pointer here. Or here actually. Cursor pointer, save this, go back to the app, and now we have the correct cursor. Great. Great, okay, so now we're almost finished. The last thing I want to do is make the background of this card go darker when we hover over it. So let's do that now. Let's go to the card styles, the budget item styles, and let's set a hover. So let's go down here and let's set hover, and let's set the background color to change, and we want it to go a little bit darker, not much darker, but just a little bit. And we are going to be using a SAS function to do this. We will be using the darken function. Okay, and the first parameter we have to put in is the color, which will be the light gray color. And the second argument is the amount. How much will it get darker by? And here we can put in a percentage value. So here, let's put in 2%. Save this now and go back to the app. And let's try and hover over it. And it gets a bit darker. Great. However, we don't have a transition, so it's changing colors instantly. So let's just change that. Let's go back to the code and let's set the transition. To make this a bit neater, let's actually just cut this and move it up here to make it a bit neater. And let's set transition here. Transition, and we'll say background color 0.2 seconds, 0.2 seconds, ease out, so that we have the same timing and transition function that we have for the button, the X icon button. So let's go back here and let's see how it looks. There we go, that looks a lot better. Great, okay, so now that looks very good. And it's now easing into the change of color. Great. So now we have the UI completely finished. Now it looks exactly the same as the UI design that we have. Great. So now we can start implementing the functionality. Okay, so the first thing we want to do is we want to be able to add items using this form. And for this, we're going to be using Angular forms. Let's go back to the code here, and let's go to the add item form component. Great, okay, so here we want to be using Angular forms. We are actually going to be using template driven forms, which means that we're going to be setting up most of the Angular form through the template. So let's do that now. Great, okay, so the first thing we want to do is we want to import the Angular forms module. So here we have the docs for Angular forms. So let's first scroll down here and let's see how to import Angular forms. Okay, so we have to get the forms module from Angular forms. So let's go back to our app and let's go to the app.module.ts, which is down here. So click on this and let's go up here and import Angular forms. I think it's forms module. Okay, forms module from @Angular forms. Okay, and in the imports here, we can put forms module, and there we go. Okay, so that was the import that we needed to create template driven forms. So let's go back to our component here, and let's go to the form tag. By default, when we import Angular forms, then that module will convert all form tags to Angular forms. This means that Angular has already done most of the hard work for us, but we have to actually create a template reference variable that can store this form object that Angular has created for us. So we can do that using a hashtag to create the template variable, and then we can set the template name to item form and set this equal to ng form. Okay, and we can also now use event binding to bind to the submit event on this form. So we can use the ng submit event, and set this to on submit, and then pass in the item form. And that is a method that we have to create now in the TypeScript file. So let's go to this TypeScript file and let's create that method. So on submit, and we get that form passed into this method. So we'll call it form, and this will be of type ng form, which we have to import from Angular forms up here. Okay, and here for now we can just console.log form. So save this now and let's go to our app and let's see if we can see what's happening. So let's go to the console and let's click add and see what happens. And nothing's happening. And that's because we have to go back to the code and we have to set the type here to submit. So save this now and go back to the app and let's try that again. Great, okay, so we get this ngForm object logged in the console. And in here we have a ton of properties that we can look at. We have the value, which is an object which has no properties, and that's since we haven't defined what the properties of this form are. We have the value for valid, and that's true since we haven't set up validation yet. We have submitted true, and we get all of these properties available to us. Okay, so now let's actually implement this form. And to do this, we have to actually first create the model. So let's go to the source folder and let's create a new folder called shared. And this is to put files that are shared between all components. Okay, so in here we can create a new folder called modals. And in here we can create a new file called budget-item.modal.ts. For this project, we'll just be creating one model, so it might seem a bit overkill to create this folder structure. However, it is good to do this so that it is possible to neatly extend this application in the future. Okay, so now let's implement this model. So to create a model in TypeScript, we have to do export class and then the model name, which will be budget item. And then in here we want to create the properties, description, which will be a string, and the amount, which will be a number. And that's it. You may be wondering how we're going to know whether or not we have an income or an expense object. And the way that we're going to do this is by using the amount property. When the amount is greater or equal to 0, then it is an income, and when the amount is less than 0, then it's an expense. That's how we'll calculate whether or not it's an income or expense. So these are the only two properties we need. And here we can create the constructor so that we are able to get the description and amount. Here we can then set those values. So this dot description is equal to description, and this dot amount is equal to amount. TypeScript provides us a neater way of doing this. We cannot define these up here, but instead set this to public and public here, and we don't have to set these values here. This line of code is equivalent to the 4 or 5 lines of code that we just had. Okay, so save this now, and let's go back to the add-item-form.component.html. So here we want to bind these inputs to the model. And the way that we're going to do that is by creating an object of that model in the add-item-form.component.ts, the TypeScript file. So let's go here and let's create an input. So this will be passed into this component, and we will get the item. This will be of type budget item, and that has to be imported from the model file. We could leave it like this. However, this item may not always be passed into the component. For example, when we're on the main UI, this won't have an existing item, since its whole purpose is to create a new item. However, we will be using this same component when we click on these cards to open up and edit modal. Don't worry if that doesn't make much sense right now, you'll see why later. But we do have to set a default value here. So new and then budget item, and then here we'll just set the description to a blank string and the amount to null. Okay, great. So let's save that now. And what we can now do is go back to the template And here we can use ng-modal to bind these to the item object. So here we can use property binding on ng-modal and say that this is going to be bound to the item.amount. And we can do the same thing here and say that this is going to be bound to the item.description. Dot description with a small letter there. Okay, so save this now. And we also have to set the name. So here, let's set the name equal to description. And here, let's set the name equal to amount. Okay, save this now and let's go back to the application. And let's click on add now. Okay, we get the form object. And let's go to the value. Here we have an object. And we have the description set to a blank string and the amount set to no. So it is working. Great. Okay, so now let's go back to the code. And now we can create some validation. So let's set required on both of these inputs since they are both required. Save that now. Now let's go back to the app and let's see what happens when we click add. So it does allow us to click add, but we get this form object back and it says that the status is invalid. So this form is invalid and we can go to the valid property here and it's set to false. This is happening because of the Angular Forms module. The Angular Forms module has a lot of inbuilt functionality for validation. So just by putting required on those inputs means that it will perform validation on those inputs to make sure that they have a value. And if not, then Angular Forms will tell us by setting the valid property to false. This is great. Okay, so now let's go back and let's now manage this validation. So, for example, the user shouldn't be allowed to click the add button when the form is invalid. So this should not be clickable. So we can set the disabled property here and bind it using property binding with the square brackets to the form variable here dot valid. So what this is now saying is that this button will be disabled when the item form is valid. And that's actually wrong. This button should be disabled when the item form is invalid. So we have to put a not here. There we go. So not valid. Let's save this now and go back to the app. And now this is now faded out and we have this icon when hovering over it. It is now disabled. Great. Okay, so now let's see if it works when we put a valid value within these inputs. Let's set this to 5 and let's set the description to testing. And there we go. We now get this add button not disabled. Great. So now let's click add and we now get the ng form in the console and it says submitted true. And if you go to the valid property, it's true. Great. Okay, so now we have validation on our Angular form. Now what we want to be able to do is when the add button is clicked, we want to be able to add an item to one of these columns. So that's what we're going to be doing next. Let's go to our code. Let's go back to the component class for the add item form. And here, what we want to do is we want to create an event emitter. So let's do that now using the output decorator. We want to create an event emitter for when the form is submitted. So form submitted. Let's actually just call this form submit. Okay, and this will be of type event emitter. And this event emitter will send the values of the budget item. So that's why we are setting the type to budget item. And that will be equal to a new event emitter of type budget item. There we go. This was the wrong import though, so let's remove that. This needs to be imported from Angular core. So that has to be imported there. Okay, so save this now and let's go here and let's not console log, but let's instead do this.formSubmit.emit and pass in form.value. There we go. That will now send the form value to whoever's listening to this event emitter. So now that brings me on to the next point, which is we have to go to the parent component of this add item form, which is the main page, and we have to set up the event listener for that. So let's go here to the TypeScript file for the main page component, and let's create the method that will run when the form is submitted. This will be the add item method, which will take in the new item, which will be of type budget item. And with this, we now want to create the budget items array. So here, let's create an array called budget items, which will be of type budget item array, like that. And we will set this to a new array. And the reason that we are doing this is because we have to actually initialize the array. So save this now, and in the add item method, we can now do this.budgetItems .push and push in the new item. Great. Okay, so now let's go to the template for the main page component, and let's go to the add item form selector tag here, and let's set up event binding on this. So using normal brackets, surround the keyword form submit, which is the name that we used for the event emitter within the add item form component, and set this to equal add item, and then we are going to pass in this special variable, which is $event, and that allows us to get the value of the event and pass it to this method. And of course, the value of this event will be the budget item, because that's what we did in the add item form. Let me just quickly show you. Here we did this.formSubmit.emit, and then we passed in the form.value, which was of course the budget item. That is why we need to get the event variable. So let's go back to the main page. And let's save this now, and let's go back to the TypeScript file. And we are now pushing that to the array. What we can now do is go back to the template, and we can now go to the budget item list component. Let's go to the component, and right now we are hard coding these items, and that's not what we want to do. We want to be able to dynamically load these items. So let's not do this. Let's well, first of all, let's go to the TypeScript file here, and let's create an input. So at input, and that has to be imported, and that will be the budget items, which will be an array of budget items, which has to be imported from the model file. Okay, so save that now, and let's go back to the template here, and let's now set an ng4. So let's get rid of this, and let's create a div that will surround this card, and let's put an ng4 on this div. ng4 is equal to let item of budget items, which is the array that we just created, which is input into this component. Okay, so let's now go to this tag here, and here we can now set an ngIf. First of all, let's just clean this up a bit, and let's just move this onto separate lines. Okay, and let's set an ngIf, and let's set the item.amount is greater or equal to 0. So what this will do is it will only show the items which have an amount greater or equal to 0 to be put into the income column. Great, okay, so that should now work. Now what we have to do is go to the main page, templates, and pass in the budget items using property binding. So let's use square brackets and let's pass in the budget items. So let's type in budget items here and let's set this to budget items. So save this now and let's go to the app, and we don't have anything here, and that's because we haven't created the budget items. So let's go up here and let's create an item. Let's say 100 and ABC. Let's click add, and there we go. We now get an item show up here. That's actually really good because it means it's working. The reason that these values weren't put into this card is because we haven't set that up yet. So that's what we will do in a minute. But this is working, so that's great. Let's go back to the code and let's go to the list component template, and let's do a very similar thing for the expenses column. Let's copy and paste this. Let's copy and paste this whole thing, and let's replace this. Let's replace this here, and we now want to set this to smaller than. So these items will only show when the item.amount is lower than 0. There we go. Okay, and we can set this to false now. So save this now and go back to the app, and let's try and add some stuff. Let's say 1 and 1, 2, 3, and let's say add. There we go, that works. Let's try and add this a few more times. There we go, that works. We do have a slight issue with the padding here. Let's try and fix that quickly. Why is that? Margin bottom 20 pixels. That should be working. Let's look into this. Oh, okay, so the reason that this is happening is I think Angular is not setting this to block. So I think we've set this to display block. Let's try and set this here, display block. There we go. Okay, so the fix to this is to go back to the code and set the display here to block, and copy and paste it here as well. Save this now and go back to the app, and let's try this again. Let's try and say 1 and 1, 2, 3. Let's click add, and there we go. These are now spaced out. Great. Okay, so now that's working, and let's try and set this to -1, and let's click add. Great. Okay, so now that's working because the negative values are being put in the expenses column. Great. Okay, so now let's go back to the code, and now what we want to do is we want to go to the budget item card, and we want to be able to take in the item so that it can display its values. So let's go to the budget item card.component.ts, and let's remove this is income input since we won't be needing it, because we will know whether or not this is an income or expense by the amount value. So let's remove this, and let's instead put this as item, and this will of course be of type budget item. Okay, save this now. We now want to go to the template, and we now want to put in the values. So currently we have hard-coded test and 100, but we want these to be dynamic values. So let's instead pass in the value of the description using item.description, and for the amount we can now set this to item.amount. Okay, save this now and go back to the app, and we have some sort of error. Let's go to the inspect and console, and it's because the is income is not a known property. Okay, that's because we have to remove property binding on the parent component. I think that is in the list component. Okay, we have to remove the is income property binding here and set this to item and set this to item. Okay, save that now and go back to the app, and we now have no errors. So let's try and add some items. So let's say 100 and ABC. Let's click add, and there we go. We now get the correct text being put into here. But we do have one major issue, and that is that this is red. And that's because we haven't updated the ng class. So let's go back to the template for the budget item card, and let's go to the ng class. And currently we don't have the is income property, And that is a big issue since the ng class is using it to dynamically add these classes. So to fix this, we have to actually put conditions here based on the item.amount. So here we can say the item.amount is greater or equal to 0. So when the item.amount is greater or equal to 0, then the income class will be applied. And when the item.amount is smaller than 0, then the expense class will be applied. Okay, save this now and let's go back to the app. And let's try this again. 100 and ABC. Let's click on add. And there we go. We now get this in green with the correct values. Let's try and put this as 27. And let's say this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Let's click add. There we go. We now get the correct values. Brilliant. Okay, so now let's go and try a negative value. Minus 1,000. And let's say that this is rent. Let's click on add. There we go. We now get the correct value showing up here. Brilliant. Okay, so now that's working. Now what we want to be able to do is we want to be able to delete these items when we click on the X button. Okay, so let's implement that now. Let's go to the code and let's set up a click event handler for this button. So when this button is clicked, we'll say that the onX button click method is called. Let's go to the TypeScript file now and let's create that method, the onX button click method. And here we want to emit an event. So we first have to create the event emitter. So that's done using the @output decorator. And we want to call this event emitter X button click. And that'll be of type event emitter. And that has to be imported from @AngularCore up here. And we want to set this to a new event emitter, which will be of type any. And set the type here as well to any. The reason that we are putting this type as any is because we won't be sending any data at all. This is because we don't have any data that we need to send the parent component, since they already know what item needs to be deleted, since they are binding specifically to that event. Don't worry if you don't understand it right now, we will get onto that later. But for now, let's just go here and do this .xButtonClick.emit. And there we go, we don't have to emit anything. Okay, save this now. And we now want to go to the parent component of the budget item card, which is the budget item list. Let's go to the template for that list. And we want to set up the event binding for that event. So we can press enter here and we can bind to the X button click event and set this to delete. And we'll pass in the item of the current iteration of the ng4. Okay, and we'll just copy and paste this to this one here as well. Okay, save this now. And now we have to go to the component class to create this method here. So let's go to the component class and let's create the delete method. What we want to do here is we also want to emit an event. And this is so that the parent component, which is the main page, can then listen to that event and then delete it on the main array. So let's create an event emitter @output. Let's import that as well from AngularCore. And let's set this to delete. And set this to an event emitter, which has to be imported from @AngularCore. Set the type to any. And set that to a new event emitter, which is of type any. Alright, so now we're getting an error, and that's because we named these the same thing. Let's just rename this to onDelete. onDelete button clicked. And let's now also take in the item, which will be a budget item. Okay, and here we can now do delete. This .delete.emit. And actually, we do want to pass in the budget item. So we do actually want to pass in the budget item. So let's change this to budget item. The reason that we're doing that is because the parent component, which is the main page, needs to know what item it is, since we aren't specifically binding to each item. So in here we can pass in the item so that it sends that item in the event. Okay, save this now, and let's go to the main page.component.html, and let's bind to that event. So let's bind to delete, and let's set this to delete item, and we'll get the event data using the $event. And let's save this now and go to the TypeScript file for the main page, and let's create delete item, which will take in the item. And now we need to write some code to remove that item from the array. And to do this, we're going to be using the splice method on the array. So this .budgetItems.splice, this method takes in a start argument, which is the starting index from which it should delete items. Here it says it's the 0-based location in the array from which to start removing elements. So here we want to put the index of the item. So to get the index, we have to actually do this .budgetItems.indexOf and then pass in the item. And then here we can pass in the index. And then the second parameter here, we have to put in the delete count, which is the number of elements to remove. And in this case, it's just 1. We only want to delete 1 element. Okay, so save this now, and let's go back to the app, and hopefully this should now work. So let's add a new item, testing, let's click add, and here we have this item. So let's click on the delete button, and nothing's happening. Okay, so let's see what's going on. Code.delete is not a function. Oh, right, okay, so this is because we renamed the method and we didn't change it within the template. So let's go to the budget item list.component.html here, and here we are binding to the X button click, and then we are running the delete method, which doesn't exist. We renamed this to on delete button clicked. Alright, save this now, and let's go back to our app, and let's try this again. Let's try and add 100 and 1, 2, 3. Let's press enter, because pressing enter will work. So press enter, and we now get this item. Great. And let's click on this delete button, and there we go. It's removed from the UI. Brilliant. Okay, so that works. Let's try that again. Let's just try and add a few more, and let's try and add some negative ones. Click add. Let's try and delete this one. Let's try and delete this one. Okay, so this one isn't working. That's because we need to... Okay, so that's because we have to go back here and do the same thing for this column here. Alright, save that now, and this should work. Let's try that again. Click add, and let's delete this, and there we go, that's now working. Let's try and do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and try and delete them now. And they are deleting the correct ones, which is great. Cool, okay, so that's working perfectly. One thing that I want to do now is reset this form when we click add. So let's do that. Let's go back to the code, and let's go and find the form. And when we submit this form, we can actually reset the form using the ngForm object that's passed in. So here we can do form.reset. And that's all we have to do there. Save this now, and let's go back to the app, and let's try and do a new item, press enter, and it then resets. Brilliant. That's really cool. That's pretty much done now. The last thing we have to do is we have to create the functionality to edit these items. We want the user to be able to click on a card, and then it will open a modal that shows this form here, and it allows them to change the values of the amount and description. So let's start doing that. Let's go back to the code, And let's create a new component. Let's create a new terminal here, and let's do ng generate component, and we'll call this edit item modal. Okay, press enter, and that will generate that component for us. Let's go to that component here. Here it is. Here it is. And let's go to the template here, and let's start creating this modal. And essentially all we'll have here is we'll have a heading here with a class of title. And here this will say edit. And we then want to put in the form. So let's use the selector for that form. So app-edit-item-form. There we go. And we want to pass in an item. And we'll set this to item, which is an object that we haven't created yet, but that will be input into this modal component. And we want to create the form submit listener. And when the form submit event happens, we want the onSubmitted method to be called and the event data to be passed in. Okay, so save this now. And let's go to the TypeScript file, and let's first of all let's get the input for the item, which will be a budget item. Yeah, that's what we have to do there. And we then want to create the onSubmitted method, which will return a budget item. So let's get in. Let's call this the updated item, which will be a budget item. Let's just leave this blank for now. And now we want to find a way to display this modal. And the way that we are going to be doing it is by using... Okay, let's first just work out why we're getting this error. Can't bind to item since it isn't a known property of app edit item form. I think it's because this is actually called budget item. Okay, what did we call this? Oh, okay, right. So this is actually add item form. Okay, save that now and change this back to item. Okay, it's because I need to copy this, paste it in here, save that now. There we go. Okay, that now works. Okay, so what I was saying is we have to find a way to display this modal, and the way that we're going to be doing this is by using Angular material. So material.angular.io, and we are going to be using the modal component. The dialog component. Angular Material provides us with a very easy to use API to show and hide these modals. This means that we don't have to write this logic ourselves. So let's go and install Angular Material. The way that we can do that is by going to the Get Started page and following these instructions. Let's copy and paste this statement here. And let's go back to the app and let's paste it into the terminal and let's press enter, and that will install Angular Material. Okay, now it's installed. Now what we can do is we can go back to the page here and we can follow the instructions. So step 2 is to configure animations. So we have to go to the app.module and import the browser animations module from @angular/platform/browser. Let's just copy and paste this actually. Let's just go to app.module.ts and let's paste that there and let's import it here. Browser animations module. Okay, there we go. Okay, let's go back here, and let's go to step 3. Here we have to import the component modules. Great, okay, so let's go to our app and let's import the module that we need. For this project, we'll only be using one component. So we only have to import the dialog module. So let's import that from @angular/material. Okay, so it's mat dialog module. It's mat dialog module. There we go. Okay, let's copy and paste this and let's put it in the imports. There we go. Save this now. And let's go back here and let's follow the instructions again. So step 4 is to include a theme. And it is required to apply all of the core and theme styles to your application. So let's just copy and paste this statement here. And let's go back to the app. And let's go to styles.scss. Where is it? Styles.scss is here. And let's just import that here. Save that. And now I think we've done everything that we need to do. Yep, we don't need this gesture support because we're not using these components, so that's fine. So that's finished. Let's close this now and let's look at the dialog documentation. And we want to create a dialog and open it by passing in a component, which is the modal component that we just created. And we want to pass in a value, which will be the budget item. So let's start doing that now. Let's go back to our app. Okay, and the first thing we want to do is we want to go to the card component. And here we want to set up an event listener for the click event on the main card content, which is this div here. So let's set this to on card click. Okay, save this now and let's go to the TypeScript file and let's create that method on card click. And here we want to again emit an event. So let's create another event here at output. And this will be card click. This will be an event emitter with a type of any. Save this now. And we want to then go here and do this .card click .emit. And that's it. Okay, save this now. And we can go to the list component. And we want to go to the template and we want to bind to that event. So let's do card click and let's say on card clicked. Great. Okay, so now let's go to the component class for the list and let's create that method. Okay, so here we want to show the edit modal. And the way that we're going to do this is by using the Angular material dialog. So let's start doing that. So the first thing we want to do is create a dialog ref. And that will be equal to this.dialog.open. And we first have to create the dialog object. And for this, we will be asking Angular to inject it into the component. So we can use public dialog, mat dialog, and that has to be imported from Angular material. And here we can now do this.dialog.open, and in brackets here, we can pass in the component first, and that will be the modal component, the edit item modal component. And that also has to be imported from here. And the second parameter here is the configuration. So that is an object which will contain the width, which we can set to 580 pixels. And the data property here contains the data being injected into the child component. And for this, we want to inject the item that was clicked, the budget item that was clicked. We actually want to get the item as an argument. So let's get the budget item here, and we want to pass it in here. Great, okay. So now we can do... So great, so that will now show the dialog, but now we have to subscribe to the event when it's closed. So to do this, we can do dialog ref dot after closed, which returns an observable. Here it says it gets an observable that is notified when the dialog is finished closing. Okay, so here we can do dot subscribe, and we'll get the result, which is what the dialog returns back to us. And we will check if the result has a value. Check if the result has a value. Let's move this up there. And inside here, we want to replace the item with the updated submitted item from the form. So here we want to replace the item with the updated item from the form. So here we can do this dot budget items, and then we can get the item at the index of the item. So this dot budget items dot index of the item is equal to result. And result is the updated budget item. So that should now replace the old item with the new updated item. Okay, save this now, and that should now work. Let's go to the app and see if it works. So let's add one. Let's add ABC. Let's click add, and now we have this show up here. Let's try and click on it, and nothing happens. And that's because I don't think we've set it up to run this method. So let's go back to the template for the budget item list. Oh, okay, so it has been set up, but only for the expenses column. So let's copy and paste this to the income column as well. Okay, save this now, and let's go back to the app, and let's try this again. 100 ABC, press enter, and let's click on this card. Okay, something is happening. We do get this modal show up here, but we are getting an error. Okay, and this error is because there was no component found, no component factory found for the component, and this means that we have to add it to the entry components array. Basically what this means is we have to go back to the app.module, and we have to go down here, and we have to add a property here called entry components, and set this to an array, and we have to add the edit item modal here. There we go. Save this now and go back to the app, and hopefully this works. ABC. There we go. We now get this modal, which shows us this form here. Great. So we got the modal working. Okay, so now let's go back to our code, and let's go to the edit item modal component. Okay, so let's go to the TypeScript file, and here we can actually now return the value to the caller of this modal. Okay, so the first thing we have to do is go to the constructor, and we have to get the dialog reference. Let's press enter here and split it up onto multiple lines, and let's do public dialog ref mat dialog ref which will be of type, and then here we put in the name of this component. And we also want to do @inject mat dialog data, and this has to be imported from @angular/material, and then public item budget item. There we go. Okay, so we don't need this item anymore since the item will be injected through the modal here. So let's remove this now. And let's, okay, so here it says cannot find name mat dialog ref. And that's because we have to import it from Angular material. So make sure that you import these from @Angular material. And let's remove the input here because we're not using it. Okay, save this now, and that's good. So now what we can do is we can go onto the onSubmitted method and do this .dialogRef .close and then pass in the submitted item, the updated item. Save that, and when this closes now, then it will pass the updated item to the parent component, which is the list component. And that is what the result is. This result is the budget item that we are returning here. So that's how we get access to the updated item. Great, okay, so now let's try and see if this works. Let's go and create an item, press enter, and let's go here and click on the card. Okay, we're getting another error. Let's inspect this. Static injector error. There's no provider for injection token mat dialog data. Okay, so we're getting this error, and I think I know why. Let's go back to the list component. So here we are passing the item as the data property, but I don't think we are passing in this item to this method. So let's go to the template, and yeah, okay, so we're not passing the item object. So here, let's pass in the item object, and let's do the same thing as well here. Okay, save this now and go back to the app, and this should hopefully now work. So ABC, click add, and let's click on the card, and there we go. So we now get this modal show up, and we now have this form with the correct values being displayed here. Great. So now what we want to do is we want to be able to make changes and then submit them so that they can be changed on the main UI. Okay, so let's go back to our app here, and what we want to do now is we want to go to the modal component. Okay, let's go to the template. Okay, so we are listening for the form submit, and we are getting the event data, which is that. Okay, so this should actually work. Let's go back to the app and let's try and change this to updated. Let's click on add, and there we go. That's actually been updated now. Brilliant. So let's try and update this to 500. Click add, and that's now been updated as well. Awesome. Okay, so now the only thing we have to do is just change this button to not say add, but to say save. So let's change that now. That should be a quick change. Let's go to the add form.html, and what we can do here is let's find the button. There we go. Let's remove the is primary, and let's use ng class. So let's use ng class here, set that to a string. Let's put some curly brackets here, and let's set is primary, and then here we have to put a Boolean value. So let's go to the component class, and let's create a Boolean value here that says is new item. Okay, let's not set this as the default value here, but let's instead go to the ng on init, and let's set an if statement here. So this will now check if item has a value, Okay. So this means that an existing item object was passed into this component. Therefore, this is a new item. This is not a new item. So we can now do this dot is new item and set that to false. And we can now do else, and we can do this dot is new item is equal to true. Okay, save this now and go back to the template, and we can now set this is primary to be used when is new item is set to false. So not is new item. And then we can do a comma here and say is success when is new item is set to true. So save this now, and let's go back to the app, and we can see that we've got a problem. This hasn't got a color, so that isn't too good. Let's see if we can. Nope, we can't do anything there. Okay, we probably have an error. Yeah, cannot read property amount of undefined. Oh, okay. Oh, okay, right. So that's because I removed the default value. Yeah, so go to the component class again, and in here, do this dot item is equal to new budget item. Put in a blank string for the description, and put in no for the number, for the amount. Save this now, and go back to the app, and let's pass in. Oh, okay, and okay, so we are getting a change in color, and this is now green. So this has the is success class, but that's not what we want. So let's see if we did this wrong. Let's just add something here. Oh, okay, so this is doing the exact opposite of what we want. Okay, so that's interesting. That's probably because the ng class is wrong. So we want is primary when it's not a new item. No, that's wrong. We want. Oh, okay, yes. So no, that's wrong. So we want it to be primary when it is a new item, and we want it to be success when it's not a new item. So when we're updating an existing item. Okay, save this now and go back to the app, and we have the purple here. That's good. Let's add something here, and let's click on this, and now we have this green here. Great. Okay, so that's brilliant. Now we want to change the text to be save when we are updating. So let's go to here, and let's not put the text directly here. Let's press enter, and let's use a paragraph tag that says add, and let's copy and paste that, and let's change this to save. And we'll be using ngIf to determine which of these is showing. So for this, I'm going to use ngIf and set that to is new item. And I'm going to use ngIf here and do the opposite when it's not a new item. Okay, save this now, and let's go back to the app, and let's add an item. Okay, let's click on this, and it says save. There we go. So we now have the save button. It works, and this says add, and it is the primary color. So there we go. We are almost finished with this application. We can now add items. Let's say this is salary. Click add, and we can delete items, and we can put an expense minus 800 rent. Click add, and there we go. We have that. And we can say minus 200 is insurance. Press add, and there we go. Okay, so the last thing we have to do to complete this application is to create the functionality so that we can see the total budget up here. So let's start doing that now. Let's go back to the code, and let's now just clean up these tabs. So let's just close everything, let's just close all of our tabs here. Okay, and let's just go to the main page, component.html. And here we want to replace this hard-coded value here with string interpolation, and we'll call this variable total budget. So now we have to go to the component class and create that property. So let's create that property, total budget, which will be a number. Okay, and that will be by default, that will be set to 0. Okay, and when we add items, we want to add the amount to the total budget. So to do that, we'll do this dot total budget plus equals new item dot amount. And when we delete an item, we will do the opposite. So let's copy and paste this. And here we will just change this to item. And here we will set this to minus equals. So this dot total budget minus equals the item dot amount. Great, okay. So save this now and let's see if this works. So it's set to 0, great. Let's add salary, press enter, and now it says 1,000, that's good. Let's set rent, so let's say minus 800 is rent, click add, and now it's gone to 200, very good. Let's add minus 500 insurance, add, there you go, and now it's negative. Brilliant, okay, so that is working. The last thing we have to do is conditionally style this so that when it's a negative value, then it's red, and when it's a positive value, then it's green. Okay, so let's do that now. Let's go to the template and let's use ng class to conditionally set the class. So here, the class is currently set to red and that's hard coded, but we want to use ng class to conditionally set the class of this heading tag. So let's type in ng class here, set that to a string and put in the curly brackets, and we'll set red to when the total budget is smaller than 0, and we'll do a comma and then set green to when total budget is greater than 0, not greater or equal to, since when it is 0 we don't want to put green or red, we want to put white text. So let's save this now and go back to the app, and now it's 0, so it's a neutral, so it's white text. When we put in salary, it's going to be positive. So salary, click add, it's now positive and it's green. Brilliant. Okay, so let's add rent. Let's add rent as 1,200, and let's set description to rent. Click add. Let's change that to minus 1,200. Save. Okay, and we've discovered a bug. When we update items, then the total budget isn't updated. So that's something we have to fix. So let's go to the list component. That's where we do the updating. That's where we update. So we have to do this in the main page component so that we can also update the total budget. So what we can now do is create another event at output. We'll call this update, and we'll create the event emitter here. And here we will have to get a bit creative. So we can't just pass the budget item. We have to pass the old budget item and the new budget item. So the way that we can do this is we can create an interface with the new type of object that we'll be needing here. So for now, let's just set this to any, and set this to new event emitter of any. But now let's create the interface. So let's say export interface. Okay, no. So let's go up here and let's say interface, and let's give this a name of update event. And in here we will have the old, which will be a budget item. We will have the new, which will be also a budget item. this interface will allow us to now use this as the type. So update event and update event. The way that we're going to be using this is we're going to be setting the old property here to the old budget item object and the new to the newly updated budget item object. Okay, so now let's go down here, and instead of doing this, let's just comment this out, and let's do this.update .emit, and here we have to pass in a value which is the update event. So let's pass in an object here. Let's set the old to the old item, which was what's passed in here. So that will be item, and let's set new to the result. There we go. Okay, so that's all we have to do there. Now what we can do is we can cut this, and we can go and save this now and go to the main page.component.html, go to the TypeScript file, and we can create the update method here. It will get the update event. So that will be the update event, which will be of type update event. But we have to actually import this. So let's go back to the list component here, and let's export this interface. Okay, save this now, and go here, and let's import the update event from module that list component. Okay, great. So make sure that that has been imported there, and let's go down here now, and now let's just paste in what we just cut. Okay, so now let's uncomment this. Okay, and this item here will be the old item. So here we can put the update event dot old, and here we can do the update event dot new. There we go. So let's save this now, and let's see if this actually works. So let's go to the app, and we're getting an error. Okay, so the budget item list component. Okay, so we're getting this error here, and I think we have to move this. So let's cut this, and let's go down here, and let's paste it here. Okay, and we're not getting the error anymore. So save this now, and let's go back to our app. And now let's see what happens when we put something in here. Okay, we get 100. Let's see what happens when we change this to 105. Save. Okay, so that's not working. That's not changing at all. Okay, so let's go back to the code and let's see what's going wrong. So this.update.emit. So from the main page, we aren't actually binding to the update. Oh, okay. So let's pass in. Let's bind to the update event, and let's call the update item method and pass in the event. Okay. Save that now, and let's go back to the app, and let's see what happens. Let's put in an item, and let's change this to 200. Let's click save, and there we go. That worked. Brilliant. Test, save. There we go. That worked. That's really good. Okay, so now we have to write the code that will update the value of the total budget when we make changes. So let's do that now. Let's go to the main page.component.ts, and in the update item method, we have to update the total budget. Here's what we do. We will do this.total budget minus equals update event dot old, dot amount dot amount. So that will remove that item from the budget, and then we want to add the new one. So this dot total budget plus equals update event dot new dot amount. There we go. Okay, so let's save that now, and let's go to the app, and let's try this now. Let's put in 100, test, add. Let's put in 500. Let's just call this salary, add. Let's put in 800, or let's put in minus 800 for rent. Press add. Let's add 80. Let's just go test 1, 2, 3. Add. Alright then. Okay, so this value is correct, because here we have 680 and here we have 800. Good. Let's try and update this, and let's see what happens. Let's make this a positive 800, and then this should become 1,480, I think. Yeah, there we go. Brilliant. Cool, so that's working. Okay, let's change that back. Let's change to minus again. Click save. There we go, it's back there. Let's change this to 1,000. Click save. Brilliant. Okay, great. So now it's updating. Great. Okay, so now the total budget is updating when we make changes to the amounts of these budget items. Great. Okay, so now we have completely finished this application. Alright guys, thank you so much for watching this video. Please let me know what you thought of this project down below in the comments, and I'll see you in the next video.